Hi, everybody. I am Dr. Krista Donnelly, one of the good doctors of Abbey Research. And here at Abbey Research, we are big believers in the idea that curiosity can change the world because it's honestly the only thing that ever has. Because we as humans change through relationships and stories. And those always start with a question of who, what, where, when, why, or how. If we can pause ourselves long enough to listen and absorb the stories of others, our worldviews can shift. And this series is in service of that. It's called Welcome to My World, and we describe it as a TED Talk and a conversation. The belief that everybody has something in their lives that the rest of us can learn from, and the rest of us need to know something about. And today I am incredibly honored. He will be bashful and brush that off, but truly, truly honored to have with us my social work colleague, Dr. Rick Chamiec-Case, who is currently the executive director of the National Association of Christian Social Workers and has done more things than I can adequately explain. But we're going to give the bio a go and then go from there. He's graduated from Fordham and the University of Connecticut School of Social Work, Yale Divinity School, and Wheaton College. For those not in the Christian spaces, those last two are big deals. His research and interests are in the areas of spirituality in the workplace and the ethical integration of Christian faith and social work practice. For those of you who have been around here, I am also a faith-based social worker, and this integration is incredibly important actually to how we do life here at Abbey Research. And so believe it or not, this is very, very foundational to the work that we do. So I'm really excited. He taught from 2008 to 2011 as an associate professor of social work at NIAC, which is in New York State, and then associate professor of social work at Calvin College. He was then the senior vice president at ARI of Connecticut, whose mission it is to provide homes, jobs, and opportunities for people with disabilities and their families. No big deal. He's been married for over 35 years with 2 adult children and a niece who has lived with his family for most of her life. I love that. Family is such a flexible definition. So Rick, thank you so much for joining me.
So delighted to be part of anything that you're involved in, Kristen. You've been a hero since I've known you, and anything you're doing, if I can be a part of that space, I'm in.
Oh my gosh, mutual admiration society here for sure. So whenever I chat with social workers, my favorite question to ask is, what is social work? What is social work to you?
Because I am a faith-based social worker, I need to bring in how the two are connected. Because for me, as a person, I have 2 really big passions. Well, many, but in terms of this question, 2 really big passions. One is my faith, which has been with me almost all of my life, as long as I can remember. It's probably deepened more than any other part of who I am and who I've become. So that's one passion that is just part and parcel of who I am. The other is social work. And that's something that probably didn't catch up with me till closer toward my 20s or 30s, but also now is just too important not to be a central aspect of my life. And I have this bias, as many people of faith and social work do, is the two are intertwined in some way, and that trying to understand how the two can complement each other, strengthen each other, be in conversation with each other is really important. So that's why, sort of a long prolegomena, when I think about what is social work, I think about the faith, which from the Christian tradition talks about the dual importance of loving God and loving your neighbor as yourself. And so that part about how does one love one neighbor as oneself is what social work is really strongly committed to. How do we love our neighbors as ourselves? How do we enter on the journey of our neighbors, some of whom are marginalized, some of whom are struggling, some of whom are doing just fine, but have goals that they're looking to reach and are looking for a helping hand to do that. But I think social work gives tools, gives experiences, gives a community of folks with the same interest and experiences to be able to reach out to those folks for whom justice is not being served, who are really struggling with aspects of their lives, are looking for some new directions, and social workers can be assist. I think social work is committed to equipping those, we call them clients, whether they be individuals or families or communities or societies. How can we help them meet the goals that are so important to them, which to me is linked to my journey of being a person of faith and a Christian, being on the journey with them and they with me from all that I receive when I'm on their journey, and hopefully also assisting them in their journey. So for me, that's an important part of social work, and why faith and social work are just so intertwined. I long ago gave up trying to separate them. In fact, now I think the better I can understand how they fit and work with each other, the more strong each of them can become.
I completely agree, because I don't know if I've ever shared this, but the reason I got my MSW was because I was at Baylor in seminary, and we went to Kenya and Rwanda. I was a part of a team that did that. And as I was looking around, I was just like, so my delightful theology degree doesn't feed anybody. Like, what? What's the pragmatism of this? And somebody who worked at the seminary was like, actually, I think you need to get a social work degree. I think you need to do the dual degree program that Baylor offers. And at that point, she connected me with John Singletary, and the rest is history. Who is now serving, for my viewers, as the dean of the Diana R. Garland School of Social Work at Baylor University. But at the time was, when I was learning under him, was one of the professors essentially of community practice, which is what I got into. And John is another hero around these parts.
Oh, me too. John's
not to say, I know for both Rick and myself, John is one of those, is a pantheon human. So just a really, really great person. But yeah, so I don't know how to separate them either, because for me, social work became how I put feet to my faith in a instructive way that, again, for me, because of the tools, and so much of social work is about listening. That's like fundamentally the beginning skill set. I didn't have to wrestle with like the white guilt that comes with a lot of social justice work, in a way, because I had these tools that removed me from the process. And I don't know if that's the case for other people, but that's always this freedom I felt, is I don't have to worry about how I feel about something. The tools are how I serve and take care of how I feel.
That's beautifully put, Kristen. And I think that's one of the strengths within the social work profession, is it's firmly committed not to doing for people, not to doing to people, but it's recognizing that what's important to them is what we should be committed to. And we're able to keep a distance because we're not always trying to influence them to be who we want them to be or who we think they should become. Just the opposite. We've got a set of tools to help them reach the goals that are important to them. I think that's a beautiful boundary that is part and parcel of what social work's about, that, again, takes away some of that burden of feeling like I'm carrying all of the weight of the world about making them into who they should be. And it's much more, again, listening to them and hearing them, and then doing the best we can to help them get to those places where they feel called.
Yeah, and I want to play with this a little bit more, if I could, because one of the things that I find with people who don't know Christians is that their immediate assumption of us is that we are seeking to change people. And there are a lot of Christian faith traditions that honestly do that. That's how I was raised. The evangelicalism I was raised under was to change people. But there are so many faith traditions that don't believe in that. And then you enter Christian social work. And so for the people who have only experienced that kind of Christianity, that has to sound like an oxymoron. And I would imagine that in your life, as you have moved through teaching and professorship and executive directing, you've kind of come up with people that for whom their faith and social work actually might be in tension. You're nodding. So how have you helped folks navigate that?
I think that is a struggle for many of us, and not just because of our Christian faith, but because of sort of many of our personalities that tends to think that the best another person can be is who we think they should be, or to think and to believe what they'd want. But a lot of it, I think, follows the model of Jesus, who, as I read the New Testament, doesn't spend a lot of time trying to convince people that they need to be a certain way, except to be loving. And so I don't see him spending a lot of time trying to teach them to embrace particular doctrines, or getting people, again, to be just the ways that he sort of in a narrow way thinks that they should turn into, but much more wants to model letting people hear what he has to offer, to see the life that he lives, to invite them to be a follower and to be someone who, again, can share in those values, to be concerned about the oppressed and the struggling, and to join with Jesus in that journey. And so I try to say, if that's the model Jesus can give us, to be more inviters to a way of looking at the world, a way of experiencing how we interact with others, if that can be Jesus's main way of interacting, shouldn't that be the model that I should have for myself as a follower of his? And so that's, again, something that's not easy for any of us, but something that's really important. The other thing I've learned is part of the Christian virtue tradition is this understanding of humility as a really important part of relating with the world. And this idea that we don't have much to learn from other folks who might see things differently or have different perspectives. If we've closed out the possibility, we've lost the ability to correct the things in us that are not where they should be, to enrich ourselves in ways that would be unexpected and surprising. And I try to explain, and I try to live, and I try to learn that exercising that humility, besides being something that adds beauty, enables us to be in a position to learn and to live and to grow and to enter into relationships, not as I have something that I'm going to give to you, but one of the ways that we can learn and grow and be enriched together. And again, I see that as one of the models of Jesus in the life and ministry that Jesus conducted, most of all in being willing to be sacrificial and to put others just totally above his own agenda. Those are the kinds of things that seem in tension with folks who are feeling that tension. That seems, again, to be able to release and to invite people into reciprocal relationships, much more so than ones where we sort of impress upon you the way you have to think or the way you have to live.
I mean, that's just like my entire TED Talk. So cool. I'm done with my career here. Great job. I completely agree. I think that so much of how a lot of kids in my generation in particular were raised to be Christian is a very specific agenda-based thing. Mm. And if you actually look at the fullness, not only of scripture, but of Christian tradition, it's so much more about inviting people into a fuller sense of humanity than about giving them a checklist of how to be human. And to me, so much of that is social work, is how do I invite you into a fuller sense of humanity? And there's times that I can provide one of the reasons I chose social work over psychology is the discipline of referrals that comes in social work a little bit differently than it does in psychology. And that so much more of social work, in my experience, has been about networking and finding the 97 other people that people are going to need in their lives, that no one person can ever be everything for everybody. You're going to go to 7 or 8 different therapists. You're going to have 5 or 7 different, caseworkers. You're going to need to have different coaches at different times. And the innate collaboration of social work is kind of brings that to the fore, because otherwise we're setting up codependent relationships, and that's an entire other ethics seminar that we'll need to do. But before we kind of fall down that rabbit hole, which we could forever, I am aware, as you are, as is everybody watching this, that there's been a lot of calls for social workers to be in schools and in school counseling. And as we're looking at things like the reformatting of policing or that kind of thing, there's a lot of people who don't necessarily understand what social work is, kind of trying to say where we can fit in the new national conversations. As somebody with your deep wisdom and your experience of living through a lot of social change in terms of how we see other humans in the last couple of years, what's your perspective on how social work can enter into some of these new spaces?
That's, I think, really important, because we are at a crossroads of needing to find and figure out some new ways to work with systems and institutions that aren't working. Some of you who know me, that I live in the Sandy Hook community. And when the tragedy occurred a number of years ago, I think one of the things we learned as a community was what we needed most were people who do some of the kinds of things that social work are pretty good at doing. Some of that is the listening. Some of that is the being present. Some of that is the showing and demonstrating that these sort of long-term systemic issues that haven't been resolved keep coming back, and that when they explode in some of the different ways that they do, they just show again that not having a long-term perspective on how to solve community problems inevitably are going to show themselves in ways that bring pain and hurt and devastation. So I think some of the things that social work bring are sort of a long-term perspective about taking a look at society's struggles, and not just Band-Aid effects, but again, thinking about bringing the community together, bringing especially those folks in the community who often don't have a voice,
Mm.
recognizing they have a perspective that's been missing. It's a powerful voice. It's one that, if tapped, can help, again, contribute to longer term solutions to some of the problems. And I think that's one of the ways that social workers can and should be contributing. How can they help bring together the people who we need to bring together to solve some of the issues that are there? We've seen some early evidence coming out about the effectiveness of social workers in settings where they've not been as prominent in the past. The data is still early, but I think we need to have lots of pilot programs. We need to continue to see how some of those areas are working out. One of the things that I think social workers bring to a space is not just doing, but in teaching and in training and in helping other people to increase their skill set so that in what they're doing, they can be more helpful. So a social worker who's in a school system, sure, can have 50-minute counseling sessions with students around vocational issues or struggles they're having at home. But if they can have an impact on the teachers and the administrators, they can multiply what it is that they have to bring to that environment. So again, I think that social work and the sort of range of skills, not just that stereotype of, the sort of direct practice things social workers do, but the ways they can impact the community and impact organizations and institutions. I think those are the wave of the future for social work, and I think bode well for some real systemic changes that need to happen in our societies.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things we also have to kind of wrestle with as a profession is that we don't have a legacy of doing that all the time.
Yeah.
And there have been, through lack of funding and a lot of the other excuses that we give, but the reality is that often social work has been part of the problem in some settings. And that part of our journey as a profession is to say, okay, you know what, when we were doing that, we weren't actually being true to our calling, our profession, the definition, our ethics, but we can be again. And so as I watch some people have to navigate, like, well, I don't want a social worker in my school because the social workers who took me away from my family and those kind of things, is we also have to get really comfortable with saying, I am so sorry that somebody with my title did that to you. And I want to redeem that in some way. And it's going to be, oh man, it's just going to be hard and it's going to be difficult. And we're not always built for hard and difficult, but I think if any profession is, it might be ours. So, yeah.
But I think another thing that works against us that way is we work hard not to call attention to ourselves.
True.
And I respect that. And I think that humility is important, not just for people of faith, but for social workers. But the flip side is, if we're not willing to share the stories about the impact that social work can have, then we're not going to be used in the ways that can be most effective. And just the telling of stories of those social workers who are doing early work in communities that are suffering from violence, or the social workers who were so instrumental in the Sandy Hook community, or the myriad ways that you don't think of, oh, social workers were involved in that. If we're not comfortable telling those stories, not to elevate ourselves necessarily, but just to say these are the ways in which social work can be effective, I think we need to not have a false humility that undercuts some of the value that we have to offer to society and to the different community placements that would make a big difference.
Yeah, I think we've let Hollywood be our PR agency for a little too long. And it's definitely time to tell our own stories. Yeah. And I know when I tell people I'm a social worker, like, there's always a little bit of shock. And I'm like, well, why wouldn't I be? And one of my social work colleagues has gone back to Baylor and she's in charge of large gifts funding. And one of the reasons I think she's so good at fundraising is her social work skill set. Yeah. And she's not browbeating money out of people. She's inviting people to be involved in a vision, which is so much of what social work has trained all of us to be, is a much wider, like, I've never done child protective services. I did direct practice for 7 months, knew it was not for me, and moved on to other things. I think we need a better PR agency, i.e. ourselves. No.
Yeah. And I hope nothing I've said is meant to disparage direct service folk.
No, and I don't think that anybody would see that.
Salt of the earth folks doing the kinds of things that need to be done, and their stories need to be told, because some of the critical and life-changing work that they're doing, as you say, gets cast as social workers, the one who take away kids from their parents, without describing the stories and the heroic measures that many social workers take to change the lives of individuals and the communities they're working in. So what we need are folks who work in all the different levels of social work, be it the direct service or the community levels, or working with organizations or politics or government. All of them have stories, and those stories all need to be told so that, again, people can see the kind of contribution social work can make.
Amen. And if you are a social worker watching this and you're like, I want to tell my story, I would love you to. So definitely comment below or get in touch with me another way. I would love, love, love to hear more about how the world is changing through your discipline and your hands. So please don't hesitate.
Here.
So Rick, I want to be conscious of your time, but I really do want to ask, looking back over, you've seen a lot of social work in a way, and this isn't in any way, shape, or form to call you old. This really is just to say that I deeply appreciate your wisdom and the longevity of your view. So as you kind of look at who's coming next, what excites you about the rising generation of social workers?
I would say particularly in the last maybe 5 to 10 years, the questions that I'm asked by budding social workers have to do with, where do I plug in to bring about justice and change what I see that's not right in our society? And that's very exciting. They want to know, how do I make the world a less racist place? How do I make the world a place where there's not, poor people who are not able to earn enough money just to put food on their table? They're struggling with, all the things that are happening outside of the US in terms of unfair distribution of the resources. Why are people in so many countries not getting any vaccines? How do I help make the world a place where there's more equity and there's more sharing? There's plenty to go around. What can I do to make a difference? And to see social workers in training so excited and wanting to make a difference at that level, I think bodes well and talks about addressing some of the systemic ills that we've not made the progress on that we need to, and bring promise of, again, change, and they're being a part of that change and being excited of that change. And although I'm not that old, I do hope that I live long enough to see some of that excitement as the next generation becomes social workers and makes their mark on the world in such a vibrant way.
Oh, it's going to be so much fun to watch. And I know that it's going to be great to have multi-generational spaces as well with social work, which is not necessarily something that we've gotten to do before, because there's been so much more fragmenting of generations in the past. And now we kind of get to play all together a little bit in some new and exciting ways that I'm really excited to hopefully also play my part in gathering some of those of us who have been told, like, well, I mean, like, you don't really practice social work, so you don't really have a space in the family. And like, that's not true at all. And it's not how folks like you believe. And so as we can kind of gather everybody that identifies as such, and we can all bring our unique talents, skill sets, trainings, connections, and how do we then continue to promote the skills that we've been blessed to learn and train, that we have the privilege of being trained in. Because very honestly, I think something that social workers wrestle with is the privilege of our education. And how do we take this incredible privilege that we've been given and then leverage it for the power of others? I think that's an emotional tension for a lot of us at different points in our career, especially given the populations we frequently serve. And how do we kind of wrestle with that? And one of the only ways that we can do it is to do it together and figure out how to kind of muck through this together.
Well said. Amen.
Thank you. Well, folks, if you have heard anything that either Rick or I have said today, and you're like, you know what, I really resonate with that, I would deeply appreciate a thumbs up, because even though it may seem lame to you, YouTube algorithm really likes those thumbs ups. So if you wouldn't mind, that would be great. If you love these kind of conversations about how do we do human differently, good news, you'll probably like the rest of my channel. So hit a subscribe. We've got a lot of series going on right now. In fact, we're in a year-long series about how we understand colonization and what are the long-term effects of colonization on different countries around the world. And speaking of social work and educators, a lot of the people that we work with are from a lot of those places. And we've got to learn how to have cultures in our brain that are outside of the United States. And so that's one of the ways we're trying to serve. If you'd like to get in contact with Rick directly, his contact information will be under the video. If you'd like to get involved in the National Association of Christian Social Workers, if you are a faith-based person and has never heard of the work that we're doing, please, please, please come join us. If you're listening to this before November 21, come out to Glendale, California and hang out with us. We're going to have our annual conference where we're going to have these hard conversations in person, and we would love to see you there or on the internet, where there's lots of great mindfulness trainings happening. I just noticed today in my email. So lots and lots and lots of resources and ways to expand your training and your understanding of humanity as we kind of move forward. Rick, thank you so much for joining me. It's been a privilege.
Oh, such a blast. Thank you so much for inviting me, Kristen.
It's been a joy. And guys, we will see you next time on Welcome to My World.